Welcome everyone to our July episodes of Women Leaders in Customer Success on behalf of myself, Minna, and Practical CSM, who we partner with. As you know, I'm very excited to be bringing this series of great female leaders over to you, whether you're live in our session or whether you're listening to this as a post-recording. So as you know, every month I will host a new guest speaker, and together we pick up various hot topics of what is in the CS world today. Today, I have a pleasure of having Amber Monroe as my guest, and we will be talking about recruiting and retaining diverse customer success talent. Super, super hot, interesting topic, and I can't wait to get into this with you, Amber. So welcome onto the session. Could you just introduce yourselves to the audience and tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here too. We're going to get into some good stuff today. So I've been in the healthcare industry for the past 17 years, and I've been in client-facing operations roles for the last 10. Really started my career in the industry as an account manager. This was before it was called customer success. So I owned a large portfolio of health systems in the Midwest. For a company you maybe have heard of, United Healthcare, Optum. I did that for a few years, really wanted to get into people management. So I ended up working actually for one of my clients, funny story. And I directly managed a large team in a hospital for several years. I learned a ton of skills as a leader, kind of made the decision to transition completely out of the health system. I decided actually to move to the technology and kind of vendor side of the business. And it was like the best decision I could have made too. So I worked in a variety of different capacities as a director of customer success. I've owned everything from customer support, implementation and onboarding, account managers, customer success managers, in the capacities I've had in the past. So I currently serve as the head of enterprise strategy for a company called Paradigm Senior Services. Our organization specifically focuses in the post-acute care industry with home care companies. And I'm responsible for managing partnerships, enterprise level customer relationships, product go-to-market strategies for the business. And because I have such a vast array of experience in customer success, I also support the operations team through different types of various initiatives. So that's kind of a little bit about me.
Well, your remit sounds pretty huge and a bit like been there, done that, have the t-shirt from all of the
right?
systems, especially as it comes to our topic today. So recruiting and retaining CS talent, because you've done different functions in there. So, because obviously if you don't know, my guests pick their own topics and then we pick at that. So could you tell us a little bit about why this kind of topic is close to the heart, especially the diversity piece?
Yeah, I've had a passion for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging initiatives for years and years. I really started moving out of a passion into more of kind of what I would consider practitioner-facing role when I became a leader. I think there was an opportunity for myself, and I'm a Hispanic American, so I felt there was like this overwhelming sense of duty and responsibility myself to open doors and spaces for other underrepresented groups of people. Mm-hmm. And so I feel truly passionate about this. I'd say my first leadership position, the organization I was working for at the time had like a call to action for department leaders to kind of step up, make changes in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion. And I personally felt called to do something, and I responded to that. So I served as the founding chair of an employee resource group that was centered and focused around women. If the audience is not familiar with employee resource groups, or oftentimes called ERGs, they're typically employee focused, they're employee driven, they focus on creating diverse and inclusive workplaces. And typically they're always sponsored by someone in HR. And I was able in that capacity to be able to create peer mentorship programs for women. We partnered like women leaders that were interested in becoming leaders with tenured leaders for support. We helped facilitate conversations around private nursing areas for breastfeeding mothers and all sorts of different initiatives. So I was really, really proud to be a part of something at the very ground floor. And I think for me, like the most important thing I want to contribute to today's conversation is I leave people kind of not only with like thoughts and ideas, but best practice recommendations on ways that they can drive and impact change within their organization. I think sometimes this topic tends to be some sensitivity around it. And sometimes even, I could even argue an aversion at times, but I want to like help build some frameworks and give people confidence to have these types of conversations in their organizations.
I think that's super interesting. So for the audience, just to have some takeaways and what things they could be starting to think about and do. So so let's get into it. So can you tell us a little bit more about what you think it means to have a, sort of a diverse hiring strategy, and especially in the context of sort of CS teams and so forth. So let's start with the hiring side, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I kind of want to level set too, and you kind of got to understand where your organization is today, and what works in one organization might not work in the next organization. Kind of CS leaders all the time say it depends, and it really does depend. It's like our favorite word, it depends. But I really think that there's an opportunity to work really closely and in tandem with your HR departments. To really understand what hiring strategies and practices are currently in place. And then from there, you can kind of work with your HR team to kind of build out what that diverse hiring strategy kind of look like. And really what diverse hiring strategy is it's creating like conscious, focused efforts on being inclusive in every aspect of recruiting. And so the focus is really being very conscious and cognizant of biases in the workplace, and also finding ways and opportunities to minimize bias as much as you can too. And then you really want to focus too on attracting underrepresented groups, and you want to attract talent from underrepresented groups as well. So, and just to be clear too, this isn't something that I'm talking about where we're like filling quotas or marking boxes or some other form of tokenism. That's not what this is. This is really building the strategy that helps businesses to more successfully achieve their business goals. And there's a lot of studies out there. There's one that's my favorite, and I'll leave you with it so you can kind of dig into it if you want to. But there's one called Clover Pop, and it's hacking diversity. And really, it's really great. It talks a little bit about different types of makeup of teams and the effectiveness of decision-making on those teams. Okay. And really, it was centered around all male teams. So if a team is made up of all men, they make 58% better decisions. And so kind of just think about that number as I go through the rest of these. And the other one is if you have a gender diverse team, and essentially for this specific study, gender diversity in this study was at least one male representation, one female representation. And if you had a gender diverse team, your team made 73% better decisions. So already, if you add another, gender diversity inside of your team, you're already positioning yourselves to make better decisions as a team as a whole. Mm-hmm. But it gets better, because if you add age and gender diverse teams, and age is in the purpose of the Clover Pop study, it talks a little bit about if there's at least a 20-year age gap amongst the people that work on your team. When you have age and gender diverse teams, that is, those individuals or groups of people make 80% better decisions. And then the final, icing on the cake is when you have a gender diverse team, you have age, and you also are geographically, meaning that you're choosing members in teams from different countries, 87% better decisions. So to me, if that really isn't a call to action to say like the importance of creating inclusive environments to but also attracting diverse talent, it is better for business and it helps move businesses forward in that capacity.
Wow, that is quite a jump from 59 to 87, right?
I know.
Improvement in that. So I guess that leads you on to, how would you say that a CS leader can define these hiring needs with this sort of lens in mind? What do you think they should be doing?
Yeah, I think when it comes to defining your hiring needs, you really have to get pretty granular on the skill sets you need and the roles you are hiring for. And then you also really need to understand the makeup across your team and what skill sets team members have and where you have gaps inside the business too, and hire towards that or hire against that. I also think too, it's really good practice for everybody to have some type of cadence where you're evaluating your job descriptions at least on an annual basis to ensure that your job descriptions are utilizing inclusive language. And the reason you want to really focus on creating inclusive job descriptions too is so you're not excluding groups of people inadvertently or even unconsciously, not by intention. I think that's really, really important. So one thing you want to do is kind of separate, and I've done this a few times before with a couple different organizations, is kind of sit down and you separate your nice to haves versus your need to haves. What's the minimum qualification and requirements that I need to have to fill this particular role. And then look over those qualifications to make sure you're not creating any sort of barriers or excluding people based on how you have your job description written. And I think it's important too with your posts. If you tend to use a recruiting firm, you might not have recruiters internally in your organization and you're hiring a recruiting firm. I think it's important that you are conveying kind of what the hiring needs are and what you're looking for as well. And then when it kind of comes to diversity too, I think we tend to think it's gender and race. Right. However, there's just so many other contributing elements to diversity: neurodiversity, disability, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation. I think those are all important factors that need to be considered through this type of conversation too. So keeping that lens in mind, you just want to make sure that you're inclusive in nature with your job descriptions, your posts. And I think that's really important when you're kind of defining what those hiring needs need to be or what they look like.
Yeah, back to your point of conscious and focus in terms of being mindful of this thing is, I think, the good starting point. You talked a little bit about gaps and identifying gaps in terms of your skill sets within your teams. What do you think in terms of how do you go consciously identifying these gaps then?
Yeah, I think it's important too that you are eliciting levels of feedback from employees too. I think that's one opportunity for you or for anyone that has the responsibility of hiring employees. Employee feedback is super powerful from a measure standpoint on how well an organization is doing and not doing in terms of creating inclusive work environments. I also think we've done, there's been some progress, and we'll talk a little bit about statistics a little bit later, but there's been some progress on the effort of diversity, but there is so much opportunity still left to do. And the progress has been very, very slow. And I think even if you're putting a lot of resources and effort around, diverse practices within your business and within your organization as part of the recruiting process, I also think too is that we have to focus on, are we creating environments for employees that's inclusive? Do they feel like they belong in the groups in which we're hiring them towards too? Because nothing worse than having the effort around diversity, and you can't have diversity without the inclusion and belonging piece too, because that's where, you're impacted directly by, turnover in the business, and there has to be an intentional focus around those efforts and initiatives too.
Yeah, I've heard once someone say, go and have a look at people on LinkedIn in that organization and see if you can see anyone like you there.
That is a true fact. That is a true fact. It was so funny. At one of the organizations I worked for too, they actually post every single employee they have. And it was really nice to see people that physically looked like me. And, I think, we are creatures of habit too, and we're humans, and we like to feel included and part of something.
Right.
And in turn, if we can foster that in our work environments too, what happens is employee satisfaction goes through the roof, retention goes through the roof, and we have better work performance, and you can really drive and move that business forward. So I think that's important. And that's a good thing. Also, read the Glassdoor reviews. What are Glassdoor saying? What's Google reviews saying? Especially for those, there's so many people right now in the market for customer success roles that are really looking to get hired. I think you really, especially in the economic climate we're in right now too. I know a lot, and I speak with a lot of CS individuals that are interested in jumping into customer success, or maybe looking for a new opportunity, or was recently laid off and looking for an opportunity. I think it's important that you're really intentional about the types of organizations you're working for too. If you want to have a long tenure there, I think it's important to understand, how do they place a focus on a diverse hiring practices? How was the hiring experience for you? Is there an opportunity for you to provide feedback to the interviewer or to the recruiter as part of this conversation too? I think that you hold a lot of power in making a change too. It doesn't just have to be a leader. It can be anybody.
Yeah, and we'll come to that, I think, in a minute. But you mentioned this sort of recruitment process, and I always think it's a two-way street, right? Because you should be dating them, and they should be dating you.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think when we look at it from the inclusive lens? What are some of the best practices you would envision giving to the audience? Saying, if you were hiring yourself, what things to be consciously mindful of?
Yeah. It's so interesting because I feel like recruiting hasn't really changed. You're still sifting through resumes and CVs, and you're trying to assess someone based on what's on this piece of paper too, and you're conducting interviews, and that whole process actually can be really ridden with bias too, especially if you have hiring managers or even recruiters that haven't had unconscious bias training, haven't had inclusive language training. I think those are really important too when you're hiring. Couple things that come to mind to me is, really placing a focus on qualifications that you have in your job descriptions, really separating out those must-have versus nice-to-haves, and using that inclusive language when you're writing job postings, job descriptions. I was listening to a podcast the other day that was like, ditch the corporate talk in your job descriptions, SLAs, KPIs, P&L, because essentially what you could be doing is you could be excluding a group of people that might not have a familiarity with those acronyms too. And I think it's important that you get really granular about what it is you're putting in your job descriptions, and kind of ditch that corporate talk. I loved that, like, ditch the corporate talk. I was like, that sounds great. Let's we're all on the same field. We're all searching for opportunities too. So, and then I think too, as part of the recruiting process, be cognizant of who you have interviewing, and make sure that your interview panels properly represent your workforce. And I think that is kind of a big takeaway too, is you want to ensure that I keep seeing instances of people having like 5 job interviews or 6 job interviews. Right. It's so exhausting for employees to have to go through. But I think if you can get really specific about who you want to have as part of the interview panel and the types of questions you're having, I think you have a little bit of an ability to control how those conversations are had too. And you have to feel confident with the people that are doing interviews. Interviewing is a skill set. I also think too is that there are things that have to do with body language that we assume is a social norm or a societal norm. that tends to exclude neurodivergent individuals that might not follow those social norms and standards. However, their skill set and qualifications fully meet what's expected of the role. And I think it's really important that you're not pulling in your own biases and saying, and kind of putting labels on people, during the interview process. I think that's really important. And the best way to do that is educate yourself, right? Spend the time training and educating yourself on these specific areas and really stay kind of on par and in trend with what's happening in the world. Because I think it's a responsibility of everyone to be educated in this area, especially if you have a responsibility of hiring people or leading teams of people.
Yeah, I think there are firms as well now that do actually train you specifically on how to recruit with a diverse and yeah. So let's say we've now hired these people, right? Retaining was our second part of our discussion topic today. So what do you think are some great retention strategies that CS leader could be putting in place to drive this and therefore, fill the cycle of having more diverse teams?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think too is your organization prepared to hire more diverse talent too? I think that's important too when it comes to if your organization you feel like is prepared, that I think then you go out and recruit diverse talent and you create diverse and inclusive culture. It really starts with you, starts with the hiring manager too. I think, like I said before, focus on trainings that teach you ways to do this effectively. So you have tools and the skills you need to manage highly diverse teams. I think that's really important. I think also proper onboarding and education as we're, it being in a customer success professional and being a customer success manager myself, that you want to create frictionless experiences for your clients and you want to do the exact same thing with employees. You want to have clear indicators of what goals are, what milestones people need to achieve, and then rewarding against those achievements and goals. And that takes work. You have to build that framework out. I've seen lazy management in my career. We probably all have seen it. And I think this is very intentional if you really want to focus on retention. And then I think it's just, the common things as well, like providing consistent and very specific feedback. No generalizations, get really specific on an action that an employee took or a thing or something that an employee did that you really want to highlight. Compensation too. I mean, it's important to have evaluation of your comp plans and your pay bands as well to make sure that you can stay competitive in the market. And then you got to think about all the bundled offerings that you can offer to incentivize a phase of retention to, like wellness offerings, flexible work arrangements, and especially in the remote environment, I think over communication is a necessity. It's different than, when we were in an office and passing by and saying hi to our colleagues, and we don't get that type of interaction when we're working remotely. So fostering that, cameras on and conversation at times, fostering that communication and culture, I think is important too.
Yeah. So I think, one thing to just note from there again is that where does it all start from, like how you want to stick with the company? It's like how you get onboarded, right? It's exactly the same as your customers, I would say, right?
Absolutely. I can't imagine someone, decides that they, sign the dotted line that they're starting with a company and they have atrocious onboarding. And they're like, wow, I'm ready to leave this place. That was really rough. And I've seen it. I mean, probably everybody here and anybody listening probably has experienced it at some point in time in their career. So that to me is such a critical element. And if that is done really successfully, I think you're setting employees up to succeed in your business too.
Cool. Really, really great conversation. I want to get to a little bit more about statistics side of things. Do you mentioned earlier looking at obviously the statistics. Do you think we're getting better at this or we're getting worse at it?
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to like focused effort in diversity, there's a lot of studies to support that we are getting better. And I think I said before too, it's just slow. It's slow, but there has been progress. And I think now that there's been a lot of resource and effort towards diversity, I think really now we're focused on inclusion and belonging. Because I think in order to retain that diverse talent too, I think that's an important element that has to be in place. There is a study, I think it was done by McKinsey and Company, and they've done a couple of studies, I think 2 or 3 of the studies. And I think one of the studies really showed that companies that have gender diverse teams on executive teams, so executive teams that have gender diversity were 25% more likely to have above average profitability within the company. And so it's really conducive too of the topic of conversation about it. There's a huge business case for creating diverse teams, for having diverse executives. And it's really important too, when employees come and look at your organization, they want to see and feel like they belong in that organization. And when they see people that look like them, when they can identify with traits that an executive has, they see opportunities that they have in front of them too. So its representation is incredibly important too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've talked a lot about on this webinar, obviously, about hiring, and that's typically like the management role or the sort of HR thing. What would you say, like, when we talk about this from a CS lens point, what would kind of more of an individual contributor or a person who has no direct reports contribute to the diversity conversation?
Yeah.
On that side of things?
Yeah, absolutely. I think everybody has the ability to influence change, whether you have a direct reports or no direct reports. I think anybody can be leaders too. So I think you can be a leader in this initiative too. I mean, companies are made up of tons of groups of people, and a lot of them have a passion about DEI initiatives, and they want to see change and they want to support initiatives that make change. So if I was giving advice to an individual contributor now that wants to focus in this area, I think it's important to find a leader or an executive that helps sponsor your efforts too. I think that's really important. You need to really have support when you're making this type of change if you're doing it in a company-wide perspective, and everybody has to be on board. Can't just be one leader, can't just be one individual contributor. It really needs to be a concerted effort cross-functionally across an organization. So you can really be a role model to others. You can stay educated about DEI trends that are happening and bring forward candid conversations. Be the person that steps in and says, hey, I'd love to create an employee resource group. I'd love to elicit employee feedback on a specific topic. I'd love to help support in this area. I think that's a great way that you could probably get started in improving that as an individual contributor.
Brilliant tips, right? It's all about us all together rather than, just starting from one element. Before I come to you for last questions from my side, please do feel free to put in the chat any questions you have for Amber. As you can see, she's obviously super passionate about this topic, and I'm sure you'd love to carry on the conversation with anyone that wants to talk about it more on LinkedIn.
Absolutely.
So anyone has conversation questions there, I can call them out from the chat. I think the last part I just wanted to give a shout out to is just if you didn't take anything else away from this conversation, what do you like to leave the audience with, Amber?
Yeah, I mean, I think really the first is probably just focus on building that diverse hiring strategy, and then make sure you're measuring against that. Right? What gets measured gets managed. So it's important to have SMART goals in place too on the efforts you're making towards that effort. And I truly don't look at diversity as meeting a quota or checking a box. Focus on all the unique perspectives individuals bring to your organization and how diverse talent brings, really has the opportunity to move your business forward. And then consciously recruit diverse talent and ensure you're seeking the training you need to do this effectively. because you can do more damage than good if you don't know what you're doing. So I think that's really important. And then elicit support from executive sponsors, if you're looking to drive organizational change, you got to do it with a group. And I think it's important to get that sponsorship across the organization too.
Brilliant. And I think that this goes for small or large organizations. If you don't have in-house resources, try find something externally. Just get involved, I guess, is the main message I'm hearing from you.
Absolutely. Get involved. If you're passionate about it, people, and it's something that you're looking to drive change in your organization, there's obviously an opportunity there to close that gap. And so be the change you want to see too, and put forth that effort. And if you've stayed on top of any sort of DEI trends that are happening right now, you've probably seen some headlines recently about senior executive leaders that are leaving chief diversity officer positions, and it's happening in waves. And it's something to keep in mind too, is that there's a high rate of burnout in this specific industry for practitioners that are focused in DEI. And so it's really important that we're doing this collectively together. Underrepresented groups need allies too.
Perfect. Well, with that, thank you so much, Amber, for your real great tips and talk about and frameworks that you've given our audience so far today. Yes, stay connected with Amber on LinkedIn if you want to hear more from her. With that, thanks so much for attending our webinar today. And as always, look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thank you again, Amber, and everyone have a great day or a great evening wherever you are.
Thank you. Talk to you later.
Bye-bye.